Good evening, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. Austin has a thing about weird. Am I right? Is that what I heard? All right, so I want to bring a little of that weird to about the squarest topic in the world, the law. And I know you guys are the perfect audience to hear this because it involves both high tech, I know you're all over that, and also being creative about social institutions. So you've heard from Zachary Caceres now about startup cities, and you heard from Joe Quirk about seasteading. And I hope, like me, you're very excited about what those guys are proposing. I think it's going to change the world. It's going to make the world a better, more interesting place. Maybe a little weirder, too. But you might have wondered, like I've wondered, well, what laws are going to apply in these places? These guys, I didn't hear them mention that. What laws are going to apply? I wonder about that. I bet you wonder, too. I know that investors worry about that sort of thing, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. I think that's kind of a problem. I want to here address that problem, describe its parameters to you, and talk about how I think we can find an answer in history, but not the history of governments and laws, but instead the history of computer science. And then I'll wrap up by describing in very brief what I, together with Zach and some other people, have proposed as a solution, basically an open source legal operating system, which we're calling EULEX. Sounds kind of like Linux or UNIX, EULEX. So that's what I want to tell you about. Let's start about the nature of the problem, about why we care about the law. Well, look, I mean, this isn't something I have to spend a lot of time on because I know you would care about the law before you move to some place, right? Before you move somewhere, even if you're not an attorney, you're going to check out some things about what the legal system is like. Do they have good courts? Can I trust the cops? Do they legalize marijuana? Whatever it is you care about, you're going to look into that. And the same is going to be true if you're considering whether or not you move to a seastead or a startup city. And it's not just you either. It's investors, again. You know, these structures that Joe showed us, beautiful, very expensive. Who's going to pay for that? Nobody, if they don't think their contracts will be respected. Nobody's going to pay for that if they don't feel like there's going to be the rule of law and respect for property rights. So we have to have the law right if we're ever going to attract people and investors. And more than that, I mean, at the end of the day, as Joe said, we're all in the 1% here, and yay for us. But there's a lot of people out there that need some help. And I think that's a great motivator. I see that in Zach. Zach always talks about helping the worst off, and I support him in that. And people who've researched this, development economists, have discovered if you can improve the systems of governance by just one standard deviation, you can improve personal income by 300%. That's an easy win. You just tweak a few buttons in terms of the laws and the governing structures, and people get a lot richer a lot faster. So I think that's something that says we should care about the law. So we do, and let's talk about how we can find good laws for these new innovative communities. And for that, I want to suggest that we look at computer science. We look at the history of computer science, and you might wonder why. What can computer science teach us about what's basically a social political problem? Well, a lot. And why? Because we're talking about operating systems. Code is code. Now, it's true with computers, the code is the operating system in the form of software that runs a computer, but it's essentially the same problem with the social structures we call governments. There, the code is laws, and the code runs the government. But code is code. So we can look at computer science, the way computer science has developed, to learn some lessons about how perhaps political science could develop. And the nice thing about that is there's been so much more innovation in computer science than in politics, as Zach noted. So let me take you back to the era of bell-bottom jeans and shag carpets in the 1970s. At the beginning of the 1970s, about every time computer scientists built a new computer, they had to build the operating system from scratch. Every new computer had its own operating system. And then in the 1970s at Bell Labs, they came up with this bright idea, which became UNIX. Why don't we write an operating system that we can take from this mainframe and use on this mainframe too? So that was UNIX, the birth of a standardized operating system. Now, you may think now, duh, but at the time it was real innovation. Not long after that, in the 1980s, we saw another revolution, and that was the advent of personal computers. And now we had computers on desktops and in homes and offices all over the country. And this gave us lots of places to run different competing operating systems. And we started then seeing some competition between operating systems. You had Microsoft Windows over here, you had Apple's OS, and you also had, most interesting for my purposes, Linux, an open source operating system that was derived from Unix and GNU. So that's really interesting. It has a lot to teach us, and I want to suggest that really governments, politicians have only made it about up to the 1970s. For the most part, up until very recently, when politicians set about creating a new country, They did everything from scratch. Think about it. The United States has its own operating legal system. Canada has another one. They have another one in Indonesia. Every different country basically handcrafted operating system. It's like the bad old days in computing, back before shag carpets and bell-bottom jeans. Only very recently have politicians figured out what they figured out back at Bell Labs in the 1970s. Places like Dubai, they've discovered, so we want to invite a lot of investors to come to Dubai. Well, they don't want to live under Sharia law. We need to convince them to be comfortable. What are we going to do? Well, here's what they did. They basically incorporated by reference the common law of England and Wales. They wrote that into their legal code. They did some other things too. They're very smart what they did in Dubai, but that was very innovative, very clever what they did. They decided we need to attract people from the first world, so what do we have to give them? We have to give them a first world operating legal system. And the people in Honduras with the Z program, you might have heard about that. It's a really interesting program. I've worked a lot there on that project. And basically in Honduras, they have this very innovative program, a Z program. Ask me the sprout afterwards, and you won't get me to stop talking about it. It's so interesting. But the short of it is, right now, I want to say, the Hondurans have said, like the people in Dubai, we want to invite in investors. And they're skeptical about Honduras, for good reason, alas. How can we reassure them? They're going to let these special territories in their country, which they've created with this Z legislation, bring in laws from outside. So it's kind of like having a mainframe that can run another operating system. They've said, we've created this territory, or they soon will. We're creating this territory where you can bring in an operating system from outside. Now, that's a real blessing for investors and people maybe like you and me. I'm not sure I'd want to live under Honduran civil law. I'd be a lot more comfortable if they were running a legal system that I was more familiar with. So politicians are only just now catching up with that idea. But let's go back to computer science, the history of that. Remember, what's happened there is we had all these personal computers all over the place and all these different competing operating systems. So if we look at that history and we hear from Joe and Zach that, wow, we stand on the cusp of this world where there's going to be all these different, well, not computers now, but basically territories running operating systems, maybe we're going to see competition between legal operating systems the way we started seeing in the 1980s. So what does that suggest? Well, maybe we'll see something like the equivalent of Microsoft Windows being run in some of these territories. That's probably not reassuring. Or maybe it'd be like Apple's operating system being run in some of these territories. Or maybe it'll be like Linux. And in fact, I think it'll be more like Linux. Let me tell you why. Because the problem with running that model, the model of proprietary private operating systems in a governing context, I just don't think it's going to work for a couple reasons. One is, for reasons of transparency and good government, you have to be able to open the hood and see how your government operates. And you can't really do that with a proprietary operating system. So I don't know about you, but I think it's true of me and almost everybody else, and especially investors. They're not going to sink any money in a country where they don't know how things are being run. So they're going to say, open up the hood and let me see what's going on. And the other thing is, in my day job, I'm a professor of law, and I write a lot about copyright. Look for my book. It came out this spring, Intellectual Privilege. It's about copyright. Intellectual privilege, copyright, common law, and common good. And basically, as a copyright expert, I can tell you it is not going to work to have one country say to another country, hey, you copied our legal system, stop it, we're going to sue you for copyright violation. Now, Apple can do that and Microsoft can do that, but that's not going to work in the political context. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a Linux-type model, I think. Now, Linux is an open source operating system. What does that mean? It means any one of you can download that operating system and see how it works. You can look at every detail. More than that, you can download it and run it on your PC for free. And you can tinker with it too. If you see something you don't like, you can change it. I think it's a very appealing model in a political context. And so, let me wrap up by telling you what, very tentatively, we're planning to do with ULEX, which is proposed an open source legal operating system. I'm going to be working with Zach. In fact, it's very exciting. This is the first time I've gone public with this. Zach and I have been talking about this for a while, but the Startup Citizen Institute is going to help me in the next few months to get the framework of ULEX, as we're calling it, this open source legal operating system, up online. And we hope that as with Linux, there's going to be a community, maybe people like you, we can talk about this during the Sprout, that are going to help us tailor this so it works for everybody, we'll make it publicly available, and maybe someday When Joe's out there on his seastead and they're trying to figure out how to run it, they'll say, we're going to download this ULEX. Just like you might have a computer, you download Linux and you run it, you can download ULEX. And there'll be a community of people, a whole ecosystem of folks who, as with Linux, you got your Red Hats and your MySQL, these people who support Linux, we can have the same thing going on with ULEX. So I'll tell you just really quickly some of the things we hope to build into it, and then I'll wrap it up. One thing is, think about Legos. You might think innovation's great, and I love innovation too, but in the law, innovation's not so good. People don't like innovation in the law, so you might be thinking, how can you do anything different? Legos. What do I mean? The idea with ULEX is to have each little brick that goes into the system being something we're all familiar with. Oh, it's just like that, red rectangular Lego. Same old thing ever. The real creativity is how you put the pieces together. And that's what we'll do with ULEX. Very basically, we want to use off-the-shelf private sources for all the bricks in the structure. The overall structure is new, but the bricks are familiar, time-tested devices. So, for example, what's the substantive law? The thing that tells you, oh, that's an enforceable contract. Oh, that's a tort. That's negligence. Where do those rules come from? We don't make it up from scratch. What investor? What resident would trust us to make it up from scratch? No. We go to the restatements of law, the restatements of the common law. These are basically thick books created by judges and lawyers and academics that kind of sum up the common law. So that'll be the substantive law. And for procedural devices, we plan to use, and I'll talk about this more in the Sprout, basically off-the-shelf commercial arbitration techniques that are used all over the world by people who have a lot of money at stake, and that will let you, among other things, sue the government in a truly independent forum if you have a complaint against it. No more of this stuff where you have a complaint against the government and you got to go to the government court. Businesses don't run that way because they have customers. They don't have subjects. We hope we can do better. So I hope I get a chance to talk with you about this in the Sprout, and anybody later, if you want to talk about this, look at the Startup Cities Institute. We're going to have some stuff on the website there. And I think you'll see that this is a problem we need to solve if we're going to have these innovative new communities, and we can look at the history of computer science for some lessons. And I hope that something like ULEX will be part of the solution for you, me, for everybody who wants to be in these new communities. Thanks so much.